That should be everything.
Did it go through all right?
Yes, all set.
Hello, I'd like to place an order for pickup.
Can I get a large coffee, please?
Sure, that will be $3.
I believe the new proposal addresses all the concerns.
Yes, the revisions look promising.
It seems much clearer now.
The sky bled with the last blush of dusk as Jack stood by his car, his breath fogging in the cool air, his heart thrashing against his ribs like a caged creature desperate for release. He had rehearsed this night 1,000 times, sculpted every moment in his mind until it gleamed with imagined perfection. Yet now his hands shook as though they belonged to someone else. The velvet box hidden in his jacket felt unbearably heavy, as if it contained not a ring, but the fragile weight of his future. When Tu Tiên stepped out from her small farmhouse, the sight of her knocked the breath from him. She wore a pale dress that caught the dying light like silk water, her hair loose and trembling in the breeze, her eyes full of a cautious wonder that made his throat ache. She hesitated when she saw him, her hand still gripping the old wooden door as if part of her was not ready to cross its threshold. Jack smiled, a strained thing that barely masked the storm inside, and held out the bouquet of roses he had spent half the day choosing. The scent curled between them, sharp and sweet, and for a moment he thought he saw her walls soften, just a little. She accepted them with a shy laugh, asking what the occasion was, and he only said, "You'll see." Something flickered in her gaze, something like fear tangled with hope, but she nodded and let him guide her to the car. As they drove away, the world seemed to fall behind them like an old skin they were shedding. The countryside unspooled around them in long ribbons of shadow and gold, the hills rolling like the backs of sleeping giants beneath the fading sky. Jack drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, afraid that if he spoke he would spill everything too soon and ruin the delicate shape of the night. Tu Tiên sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the trees blur past, her reflection ghost-like in the window. She felt a strange tightness in her chest, as though the world had tilted and left her weightless, hovering between dread and longing. Jack glanced at her and remembered the first time he had seen her, kneeling in the rain to rescue a stray chick from a flooded ditch, soaked to the bone yet smiling with a kind of defiant gentleness that had carved itself into his bones. He had known then that his life would never be the same. When they reached the hilltop restaurant, it rose from the cliffs like a secret carved by moonlight, its stone walls wrapped in strings of fairy lights that glimmered like trapped stars. The air smelled of pine and sea salt, and below them the river shimmered like molten silver under the first breath of night. Tu Tien's eyes widened as they stepped out, her lips parting in a small sound of wonder, and something in Jack's chest twisted painfully. He led her up the stone steps, his palm sweating where it brushed her back, and the door opened to a room filled with the soft murmur of music and candlelight that glowed like captured dawn. For a fleeting instant, he allowed himself to imagine this as their life. Quiet dinners, laughter, her smile waiting for him at the end of every day. They ate slowly, though Jack could barely taste the food, each bite turning to ash as he warred with his own terror. Tu Tiên spoke about her garden, about how the tomatoes refused to grow straight no matter how she tied them, about the wild birds that nested in her roof and refused to leave. Her voice was warm and low, like the hush of rain on earth, and every word made him fall deeper, made the air around her feel like home. He laughed when she teased him about his clumsy hands, but his fingers kept brushing the small box in his pocket, and each time his pulse roared louder in his ears. Time seemed to lurch forward, pulling him toward the edge of everything he feared and wanted. When dessert came, a small cake crowned with sugar roses, he rose to his feet so abruptly that Tu Tien blinked in confusion. He walked to the balcony where the lights of the valley burned below like scattered embers, then turned back to her, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He dropped to one knee. The restaurant seemed to fall silent, as if even the air was holding its breath. Tu Tien, he said, his voice rough, shaking with all the things he had never dared say. Please, will you marry me? The words left him like pieces torn from his soul, and for a moment the world narrowed to nothing but her face. Her eyes widened, shock rippling through her like a stone dropped in still water. The candlelight caught on the diamond as he opened the box, scattering 1,000 trembling stars across the tablecloth. For a heartbeat, she did not move, did not breathe, and hope blazed in him so bright it nearly blinded him. But then her gaze flickered, broke, and something dark and fragile shuddered through her expression. She whispered his name like a prayer and a warning all at once, and the sound made his skin crawl with dread. She reached out as if to touch the ring, then drew her hand back like it had burned her. The silence between them thickened until he thought it might crush him. "I can't," she said, barely louder than the wind, and the words ripped through him like claws. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked on the first syllable, so he only stared, the world tilting sickeningly under his feet. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking, and then the truth came spilling out of her in jagged, broken pieces. When she was a child, there had been an accident, a scream, a flash of pain, a long white corridor, and then the doctors had told her what had been taken from her. She could never have children. The words landed like stones, each one smashing a little more of the world he had built around her. She said her husband's family had called her cursed, barren, useless, and had cast her out like spoiled fruit. Her voice trembled, not with self-pity, but with something far worse, the quiet certainty that she was unworthy of being loved. Jack could barely breathe. The ring burned cold in his hand, heavy as lead. Around them, the night whispered, the candles shivering as though they too could feel the crack that had opened in the world. Tu Tien kept talking, spilling years of buried shame like poison from a wound, saying she could not give him a family, that she would not ruin his future with her broken body, that he deserved someone whole. Her hands twisted in her lap like frightened birds, her eyes wet and wild, and every word was a blade slicing him open. He wanted to shout that she was wrong, that she was everything, but his voice drowned in the storm roaring inside him. When he finally found words, they were raw and shaking. He said he didn't care. He said she was his future, that blood meant nothing and love meant everything, that if they wanted children, they could adopt 100, but none of them would matter if she wasn't there. His voice cracked on the last word. She flinched like he had struck her, and tears slid down her cheeks like molten glass. She whispered that she couldn't let herself believe him, not yet, not when the ruin of hope would kill her. She begged for time, for space, for a chance to breathe. Jack sat frozen on his knees, the ring still glinting between them like a tiny, cruel sun, and he realized the answer would not come tonight. Slowly, he closed the box, the snap of it echoing like a gunshot. He rose on trembling legs, forcing his face into something that might pass for calm, though inside he was all shattered edges. He said he understood. He said he would wait. He promised the ring would always be hers, whether she wore it tomorrow or 10 years from now. And for the first time that night, she smiled. Small, broken, but real. The sight of it cut him deeper than her refusal. The air between them felt scorched and fragile, as though they had walked through fire and emerged as something half-burned. They left the restaurant in silence, the night pressing close and cold around them. The drive back was a blur, the road winding like a black ribbon through the sleeping hills, the headlights carving tunnels through the darkness. Tu Tien sat with her head turned toward the window, her reflection pale and haunted in the glass. Jack glanced at her and felt the weight of the unopened future coiled between them like a living thing. When he stopped the car outside her farmhouse, she turned to him and whispered thank you, though her voice was threaded with sorrow and slipped out into the night without looking back. He watched her disappear into the shadows, his hands clenched white around the steering wheel, the velvet box burning like ice in his pocket. The crickets screamed in the fields, and the stars above looked cold and far away, and Jack sat alone in the silence long after she was gone, wondering if patience could hold together something so fragile, or if love itself would shatter under the weight of what she could never give him. The night clung to Jack like wet cloth as he drove away from her house, each mile stretching longer and darker than the last. The road coiled through the hills like a serpent, its curves sharp enough to cut, and still he could not escape the echo of her voice. "I can't." It hissed through his mind, slippery and cold, coiling around his heart like smoke. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles gleamed like bone, and the velvet box in his pocket felt like a stone, dragging him into the depths. He had imagined this night ending with her in his arms, her laughter spilling like sunlight. Instead, he carried only silence and a wound he could not see. When he reached his apartment, the city had sunk into its hollow midnight hush, all the neon lights bleached pale and sickly against the darkness. He shut the door behind him and stood still, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the walls settling like tired old bones. The room smelled of stale coffee and dust. He sank into the couch, elbows on his knees, and stared at the ring box as if it were a live thing. The diamond inside had felt like a promise when he bought it. Now it glimmered like an accusation, cold and sharp, as though it blamed him for daring to dream. Sleep never came. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, watching shadows crawl like black vines across the cracked paint. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again, the way her smile had crumbled when she spoke, the way her voice had broken like glass underfoot. The words she had said bled through him until he could not tell where her sorrow ended and his began. By dawn, his resolve had crystallized into something hard and dangerous. He would not let her slip away. He would burn down every ghost in her past if that was what it took to keep her. The morning came brittle and colorless, the sky stretched thin like bruised silk. Jack sat at the table with a mug of untouched coffee growing cold between his hands. He had not shaved, had not moved except to breathe. When his phone buzzed, the sound made him flinch. It was Tone. The name lit the screen like a warning flare. Jack hesitated, then answered, his voice hoarse and ragged. Tone asked where he had been last night, his tone too casual, like a cat circling something it planned to kill. Jack lied without blinking. He said he had been working late. The silence on the other end was sharp as a blade. After the call, Jack stood by the window watching the city wake like a wounded beast, its towers bleeding light through the mist. He knew Ton would not stop asking. He had seen the way Ton watched Tu Tien when he thought no one noticed, the way his eyes softened like melting ice. Jack felt something dark stir in him at the thought, something feral and possessive. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass until it hurt, trying to drown the thought before it devoured him. But it stayed, crouched and patient, like a wolf at the edge of his mind. Tuan, meanwhile, sat in his office miles away, staring at a photo of Tu Tien on his phone. It had been taken at the Harvest Festival last year. She was laughing at something off camera, her hair tangled with wind and sunlight. The sight of her smile twisted something deep in his chest. He had never told anyone, not even his sister, how long he had carried this quiet ache. But now it was no longer quiet. Last night he had seen Jack in the jewelry store, speaking to the clerk in hushed tones, the gleam of a ring flashing between his hands. Tuan's stomach had turned to ice. He could not understand how Jack, of all people, could be serious about her. Jack was reckless, ambitious, built for battles, not for love. He remembered how Jack had once boasted about never being tied down, about love being a chain that rusted everything it touched. Yet now Jack had a ring. Tuan's instincts howled that something was wrong. He had watched too many men wrap their sweet words like silk around women only to leave them bleeding. He would not let that happen to her. The thought of Tu Tien's smile breaking under Jack's hands made something snap inside him. He decided then that he would find out the truth. If Jack was playing with her, Tone would tear him apart piece by piece. While Tone plotted, Tu Tien spent the morning moving like a ghost through her quiet house, her fingers trailing across the furniture as though it might vanish if she stopped touching it. The farm outside lay wrapped in soft fog, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. She tried to feed the chickens, but her hands shook too hard to scatter the grain. The memory of Jack kneeling in the candlelight would not stop replaying behind her eyes, over and over, until she wanted to scream. She had seen the shock on his face, the way his heart had cracked open in his eyes. It haunted her worse than pity, because beneath it she had seen love, real and raw and terrifying. It was the one thing she feared most. She retreated to her bedroom and locked the door, curling on the bed as the morning light crawled across the floor like cold fingers. She told herself she had done the right thing. She could not let him tie his future to her empty womb. She could not let him carry the shame that had drowned her. Yet her chest ached like something was dying inside it, slow and soft, like an animal caught in a trap. She pressed her fist to her mouth to stop the sobs, but they came anyway, shuddering out of her like broken glass. Outside, the world went on without her, the wind rattling the shutters like distant laughter. Jack returned to work that afternoon, though his mind stayed trapped in the ruins of last night. His office smelled of ink and old wood, familiar and hollow. People spoke to him and he nodded at the right times, but their words slid off him like rain off stone. Every few minutes he checked his phone, hoping for a message that never came. He imagined her alone in that silent house, hating herself for what she could not change, and the thought made his throat burn. He opened the ring box and stared at the cold gleam inside, and for a moment, he wanted to throw it out the window just to stop feeling its weight. But he couldn't. It was hers. It would always be hers. That evening, Tone called his sister under the guise of casual chatter, but his voice betrayed him, sharp-edged and too controlled. He asked her if she thought Jack was serious about anyone, if she had heard rumors, if she trusted him. His sister laughed, called him paranoid, told him to stop acting like an old watchdog, but Tone couldn't laugh. He remembered Jack's face in the store, the flash of the ring, the tension in his shoulders like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. He ended the call and sat in the dark long after, the city lights blinking like watchful eyes outside his window, and thought of Tu Tien's gentle hands and Jack's ruthless ambition colliding like storm fronts. Something would break. He was sure of it. As the night deepened, Jack found himself driving again without meaning to, the streets sliding by in a blur of shadow and neon. He ended up parked outside her farm, the engine ticking in the cold. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen, glowing faint and lonely. He imagined her inside, curled small as a fallen bird, and the urge to go to her clawed at him like fire. But he stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel until his palms throbbed. He whispered to the darkness that he would wait, that he would not leave, that she was not broken. His breath fogged against the glass, and the words hung in the cold air like a vow. Far away, Tone sat at his desk with the photo of her glowing on his phone screen, his jaw set. He whispered a vow too, though his was made of something colder. He would protect her, even if it meant destroying Jack, even if it meant burning everything to ash. The days that followed were hollow and strange, like walking through a house after the fire had gone out. Jack moved through them as though underwater, slow and muffled, the world distorted around him. He kept showing up at work, kept speaking to people with the right words in the right order, but he was not inside any of it. He was elsewhere, hovering at the edge of Tu Tien's silence. Each night he returned to the apartment that felt less like home and more like a waiting room for something that might never come. And he sat staring at the velvet box until the dark bled into dawn. Meanwhile, Tone had become a shadow. He began digging through the pieces of Jack's life with a quiet precision that bordered on obsession. He called old contacts at the jewelry district, asking about the ring. He paid a favor to a friend in city records to pull Jack's financial movements. He scoured the edges of Jack's reputation, every rumor, every whisper of recklessness that might confirm the story he wanted to believe, that Jack was incapable of love. But the more he searched, the less he found. Jack's trail was clean, too clean, and that terrified him more than any scandal could. At night, Tuan replayed old conversations with Tu Tien in his head until they frayed like worn tapes. Her laughter had always been soft, hesitant, like it belonged to someone else and she had borrowed it for a while. He wondered how she sounded when she cried. The thought poisoned him with rage. He pictured Jack kneeling in front of her, the ring flashing, and he felt something ugly curl in his gut. He told himself it was protection, not jealousy, but the word tasted like rust in his mouth. Tu Tien spent her evenings in silence. She tended the garden without hearing the wind, cooked meals she never tasted, cleaned rooms that would not stay clean. Everything blurred. She caught herself staring at the door at odd hours, expecting him to appear in its frame with that crooked half-smile. And when he did not, a strange hollow pressure grew behind her ribs. She wanted to call him, to hear him insist again that it didn't matter, that he still wanted her. But the thought of hope twisting into grief again was unbearable. She locked her phone in a drawer and buried herself in work until her hands bled. Jack finally snapped on the fourth night. He couldn't stand the silence anymore. It was not rejection he feared now, but her slow fading, the way she was erasing herself piece by piece. He told himself if she wouldn't come to him, he would bring the world to her. That night, he began building something, an idea, wild and desperate. He stayed up until dawn sketching plans, half mad with exhaustion, drawing a vision of a future she could touch with her own hands. He would not just tell her she belonged. He would prove it, carve it into the earth if he had to. Toan watched from the periphery like a hunter stalking prey. He saw Jack buying lumber, paint, soil, strange supplies with no pattern he could decipher. It infuriated him, the mystery of it, the way Jack seemed to move with purpose while Tone could only circle in doubt. He told himself Jack was building a trap, something to break her heart. The story comforted him, even if he had no evidence. He could not accept the alternative, that Jack truly meant every word he had said. Because if that were true, then Tone had already lost, and he could not survive losing her to someone like him. The confrontation came like thunder on a still day. Tone found Jack alone behind the warehouse one night, unloading planks from a truck under the jaundiced glare of a single security light. The air stank of rain and dust. Tone approached like a knife drawn from its sheath, quiet and deadly. Jack looked up, sweat dripping from his jaw, and their eyes collided like flint. Tone asked what he was doing. Jack said nothing. The silence between them shivered, taut as a wire about to snap. Tuan accused him of playing with her, of using her for some game he hadn't named yet. He said Tu Tien had suffered enough, that she was not a toy to be broken by his boredom. Jack dropped the plank in his hands and stepped forward, his face carved from shadow. His voice was low, shaking not with fear but fury. He told Tone he had no idea what suffering was, that she was not some fragile relic to be pitied, that she was fire, and if Tone thought he could shield her from pain by locking her away, he knew nothing about love. The words hit Tone like stones, but he did not flinch. He said Jack would ruin her. Jack said she was the only thing that had ever saved him. Then he walked past Tone into the night, leaving him in the stink of rain and sawdust, heart rattling like a broken drum. Tone stood alone until the lights went out, wondering for the first time if he was the villain in the story he thought he was saving. 2 nights later, Tu Tiên woke to the sound of engines outside her house. Panic flared through her until she saw Jack in the yard, floodlights blazing around him, workers moving like shadows. They built through the night, hammering and sawing as the moon sagged low and pale. She stood at the window, trembling, unsure if she was dreaming. By dawn, the bare earth behind her house had become the skeleton of something new, a greenhouse, bright and strong and defiant against the gray sky. Jack stood in the mud below her window, soaked in sweat, eyes blazing. He said nothing, only nodded once as if promising more, and then he left. For the next week, he came every night, building in silence while she watched from the dark. The greenhouse rose like a heartbeat, ribs of steel and glass catching the sunlight until it looked like a cathedral of light. He planted the floor with soil rich as chocolate, filled it with seedlings, roses, tomatoes, orchids, all tangled in wild chaos. It was messy, imperfect, alive, like her. When it was done, he left a single note on the door. It said only, "A place that grows because you do." She found it the next morning, and something inside her cracked like ice under sunlight. She stood in the center of the greenhouse as the dawn lit the glass walls, tears streaking her face, and for the first time, she believed him. He was not asking her to give him children. He was asking her to stay. She called him that night, voice trembling. She said she was still afraid, still broken, still not sure if she could be enough. He said she already was. The words wrapped around her like a lifeline. She told him to bring the ring. He was at her door in under an hour, breathless, eyes bright as stars. He dropped to one knee in the dirt of her garden, mud streaking his jeans, and held the ring out with shaking hands. This time, she said yes. Far away, Tone watched the lights bloom in her greenhouse from the road, his hands cold on the steering wheel. He felt something hollow open in him, wide and bottomless, but he did not move. He stayed until the lights went out, until the house went dark again, and then he drove away into the night without looking back.